Hello everyone, Macintosh here. If you recall from my earlier video welcoming new bros to New Eden, I gave a summary of New Eden lore and how it pertains to Vanguard. In that summary, I briefly touched upon the emergence of the Capsuliers and War Clones. I will be explaining the lore behind them, as well as the Valkyrie. I overlooked them because the Valkyrie were only relevant when discussing the now discontinued Valkyrie game. Capsuliers, War Clones, and the Valkyrie all have their own distinct uses, and we will primarily be focusing on the first two for this video. But near the end, I will talk about the Valkyrie. For reference, I consulted the official EVE Online scientific articles. Well, more like scientific fiction articles. They explain the key technologies behind the clones. Another reference I used is the lore section of the EVE Online website regarding War Clones, how they work, how they came to be, and how they compare to Capsuliers. And as a final reference, I read the archived website of Dust 514. The archive consists of stories that give clues to the early iterations of War Clones, starting with the Templars. Speaking of War Clones and how they compare to Capsuliers, I need to make a correction about what I said earlier regarding the differences between them. A fellow player on Discord by the name of Galmfey, pardon me if I mispronounced it, pointed out a glaring error in my previous statement about the War Clones. Galm referenced EVE Online lore for specifics, which, after looking them over a second time, revealed where I had misinterpreted the overall tech. And so, with this new understanding, it was important to make the video to correct the error. And before I begin, I need to preface this video with trigger warnings, as I will be touching on topics relating to death, mental health, body parts, gender dysphoria, and body dysmorphia. The lore behind EVE Online, Dust 514, EVE Valkyrie, and EVE Vanguard is pretty dark. Also, beware of flashing lights and visible violence. You have been warned. We will start with Capsulier clones. As mentioned in the previous video, Capsulier clones are high grade as they are almost a one-to-one copy of the original mortal version of the pilot. The process for making this type of clone is very meticulous. Production is heavily regulated for various reasons, but chief among them is ensuring the pilot actually survives the transfer process. Corporations that specialize in cloning produce these clones to exacting specifications that match the individual. Krumeus Incorporated, an NPC corporation that operates within the Galente Federation, went into detail on how clones are produced in the scientific article. Here's a summary on how the clone is made. The production process is divided into three major components: clone manufacturing, brain growth and storage, and clone quality. While the tech allows for literally any biomass to be used in the production of clones, such as animal biomass or literal soups, the main source is human cadavers, supposedly from willing donors, according to Krumeus Incorporated. It is argued that non-human biomass has to go through extra steps to make them compatible, which adds to the complexity and thus adds risk of errors when transitioning from a mortal life to immortality. The human cadavers are generally processed in a way that makes them more or less a basic mold or blank that can later be adapted to match the client. The scientific article makes no mention on the exact process. Meanwhile, the client undergoes thorough testing with multiple tissue samples taken to make a matching clone. However, the base clone has no brain, just a small primitive cluster for maintaining heart rate, blood pressure, and respiration while the core body temperature is maintained by the facility. That is a lot to do just for the body. The brain is an entirely different beast. The science behind it is very technical, but in a nutshell, brains are hard to make. The exact brain cells in the exact locations, with the exact dendrites, and much more, have to be carefully scanned and then applied to a gel-like three-dimensional structure that will transform and become the clone brain. Even the internal structure of the clone's cranium has to perfectly match the client's cranium, all while using faster-than-light communications technology, coupled with the burn scan of the client's original brain at the moment of transfer. Then there's the clone quality. The aim is to make a clone as close to the original as possible, or else the transfer of the mind will come with psychological and/or physiological issues down the line. According to Krumeus Incorporated, It is imperative that all clones be created using only human biomass, where the donor's immune system is crippled and the thymus removed and replaced with seeded material from that of the client to avoid rejection when seeding the clone. As for storage of these clones, stations with built-in medical facilities often have two types of clones on standby. One type is the readied clone or client clone, where one is pre-made and set up for a specific client to receive upon death. The other type is your generic clone that can be converted and ready for use in case you need one. As you can imagine, the process is very expensive. You can get a better understanding on why Capsuleers rely so heavily on their pods for real immortality. Usually, your pod only risks getting exposed to enemy fire if you were forced to eject yourself out of the ship you command in an emergency. Once your pod is exposed to the cosmic elements, the only things left protecting you is your pod's shield, armor, and hull. That and making sure you have a pre-planned escape route if you have to abandon ship. And yes, these pods do have warp capability. But if your pod somehow gets breached with gunfire, then the pod assumes the worst. Your mind is sent light years to the nearest clone as the built-in burn scanner zaps your brain to transmit the exact state of your mind at the moment of hull breach. The burn scan kills the pilot in the process. A clear sign that the pilot was killed by a burn scan is by opening the cranium of the body and looking at the folds of the brain. The burn scan causes the folds to smooth out, literally a smooth brain. But what if your clone gets killed outside of the pod? There will be a backup analog stored somewhere that periodically gets updated with your current clone analog. However, if you die outside of the pod before your next periodic update, then you will eventually wake up in the backup clone but with a time gap. This is how you know you were killed outside of the pod. As to how anyone knows when to initiate your backup analog in case that happens to you, one can only assume the company handling your backup might receive an alert from an implant inside of you that activates upon death. The implant likely has fail-safes to prevent accidental activation of the backup clone. As I said in the previous video, killing a Capsuleer is almost impossible due to various backups of these clones existing throughout New Eden. Unless you manage to find the backup analog of a Capsuleer's clone as well as the other readied clones they have on standby and kill them outside of the pod, you will not be able to truly kill a Capsuleer. This is that extreme circumstance I referenced earlier. One wonders what you have done to deserve a fate like that. Again, be careful who you mess with. As a side note, Capsuleer clones are given a wide range of options for body modifications. This includes changing genders, adjusting facial features, replacing body parts and whole organs with cybernetic implants. This has resulted in an industry where Capsuleers, and in some cases regular humans, can make any modifications to their bodies on demand. This is especially most prevalent within the Galente Federation, where certain mods can become trendy or fashionable. Oftentimes, a client feels their current bodies are inadequate or full of flaws that needs to be corrected, when in reality they're just fine. That kind of sounds like the definition of body dysmorphia. Please correct me if I'm wrong. With high-grade clones and cybernetics not possible, this can easily be taken to the extremes, limited only by the wallets of the clientele. Now for the war clones. Their clone bodies are cheaply made with biomass material and only last up to 5 years. They have an insane death rate compared to the Capsuleers, so the bodies need to be mass-produced as quickly, efficiently, and cheaply as possible. This means literally any biomass will be used to maximize that efficiency. But the real tech is in the fifth lobe implant. Unlike Capsuleer brains, the brain of a war clone is not tailored to a specific individual. This is due to the manner in which the consciousness of the individual is stored inside the brain. Unlike the consciousness of a Capsuleer, the consciousness of a war clone is not stored in analog form. It has been purely digitized and stored permanently inside the databanks at various locations throughout New Eden. During the process of becoming digitized, the brain is first burn scanned, and then the consciousness or personality of the individual becomes heavily altered to suit the needs of the war clone during the initial transfer process. Imagine the same procedure used to transmit the consciousness of the Capsuleer during the initial transfer. But instead of waking up inside a physical analog like a clone brain in a clone body, you wake up in a completely digital environment. Now imagine lacking certain personality traits where they were removed from you. While you still have some personality remaining, you are no longer your original self. If you recall the lobby screen in Vanguard during the December and January playtests, the screens looked almost plain with minimal features. During the deployment process, you were able to see me go through a tunnel effect where everything around me was static with a background music feeling like it was based on cosmic background radiation. This felt accurate to the lore given that I was playing as a war clone type infomorph. More on that infomorph part later. Once deployed, the consciousness is transferred to a nearby databank, close to but not on the battlefield. From there, the consciousness is then put into a neural interface socket, or NIS, located on the back of the war clone's neck before they get physically sent to the active battlefield in pods. This is where that fifth lobe serves its function. If the war clone gets killed, the neural interface socket only sends information that does not already exist inside the databanks. This results in a difference file packet that transmits the difference between how the consciousness was deployed and how it died. That difference is then applied to an update to the digital consciousness that resides in the databank. It is then retransmitted back into a fresh war clone with its own neural interface socket. The process will continue to repeat until the war clone completes their mission or otherwise withdraws from the battlefield via exfiltration. Now here is where I make the correction to my previous statement about a specific difference between Capsuleers and war clones. Full credit to Gamfei for helping me realize my mistake. I previously stated that war clones lose more of their personality over time as they die repeatedly, and that Capsuleers retain their personality for much longer. That was based on my misinterpretation of what the official lore actually said about the war clones. It turns out that this was never the case. It was actually the reverse. While it is true that war clones have lower quality bodies and that the consciousness has been reduced to a more primal form, their consciousness actually retains that same level of consistency between deaths. At least for way longer. This is because of the purely digital nature of a consciousness. So the quality of the consciousness is only as good as the technology that copies and transmits the data, as well as store the data long term. Since the technology behind it is built to handle repeated transmissions as fast as the clone dies, the quality or consistency of the data lasts far longer than that of Capsuleers. And while I was right that Capsuleer clones are higher grade than that of war clones, the copy is not 100%. During the process of transferring consciousness, about 99.99% of the memory is retained, well within the margins of a true copy if the Capsuleer only dies at the expected normal rate that is dependent on their profession, or never if they are smart about it. But that 0.01% loss will accumulate over time as the Capsuleer dies every once in a while. No matter how accurate the burn scan of the brain was, there is a little bit of loss in the information on the state of the mind at the time of pod breach. Gamfei pointed out that if a Capsuleer were to die at the same rate of a war clone, they will suffer massive psychological and physiological problems far sooner in their lives. The technology behind war clones is made to handle the excessive death rate that is expected of these clone types. So while the Capsuleer does not normally fear death, they are still more timid about dying. If not for the expensive implants that are installed on their already expensive high-grade clones, then for the fact that if they die too often, they will lose their sanity far sooner than expected. Another aspect of the war clone is the potential for forking. Since the consciousness is fully digital and is built to transfer between databanks and clone banks, there can be situations where two clones can be roaming around with the exact same consciousness or variants of the same consciousness. It could be the result of either a war clone being abandoned in the field with no databank nearby to recover its difference file packet, or someone handling the databanks purposefully forking the consciousness for their own agendas. This could be the foundation for some neat ideas for PvE down the road for CCP. There was already talk about this subject on the EVE Online Discord by a few players, but no word from CCP about it. One final aspect of the war clones is their strength. As an example of their physical capabilities, let's look at an incident that was documented by the Caldari State in YC-114, or the year 2012. It was a failed assassination attempt on then-Executor Tibus Heth of the Caldari State. The lone assailant was a war clone. It was able to dispatch over a dozen of the Executor's strongest bodyguards with its own hands before being successfully taken down by over 30 security staff. And that was just from one war clone. After his recovery, Heth ordered the purge of all clone enclaves within the state. But how did the war clones come about? Where did the fifth lobe implant technology come from? What were the iterations like? What became of them? First, we have to go back many years when sleepers were introduced to EVE Online as a now-dead civilization that left behind a wealth of technology for Capsuleers to salvage and exploit. Chief among the salvage were implants that were able to transmit the consciousness of the person even at the moment of death without a pod and without a burn scan. These implants were first tested on a handful of select soldiers for the Amarr Empire as part of a secret program that created the Templars. These were arguably the first generation war clones. The program was a success. The Templars were able to conquer their enemies with speed, efficiency, brutality, and without fear of death. They die and then literally respawn within seconds, complete with memories of how they died. But the Amarr Empire did not fully trust the Templars with this new power bestowed upon them. So they secretly dispatched a ship to lay siege upon the Templars and their clone reserve units with an orbital bombardment to ensure nothing survives. The operation appears to have been a success, as no one has ever heard from the Templars ever again. At the same time, the other empires were experimenting with the same concept of ground troops being given these implants. These were also first-generation clones. But later on, something started to happen. These first-gen soldiers, or mercenaries, started to exhibit strange behavior. Speaking in tongue, repeatedly writing the numbers 514 on the walls with blood, self-inflicted injuries, and personalities often manifesting with murderous intent. A behavior that only the Amarr knew about ahead of time, as they were the early testers of this technology. This was among the reasons why the Amarr wiped out the Templars. The repurposed implants that were salvaged from the sleeper sites contained traces of sleeper consciousness. They often overpowered the consciousness of the soldier or mercenary that received the implants, a fact that was revealed by the then Empress Jamil Sarum of the Amarr Empire during a secret meeting of the four empires in a hidden bunker on an undisclosed planet years ago. It was later agreed that such clones had to be purged because of the danger posed by the sleeper implants. In an effort to avoid this ever repeating in the future, the second-generation mercenaries were born using implants that were made in-house, with specialized clones grown around them. This ensured that no trace of sleeper consciousness would exist that can affect the war clones. The ones featured in Dust 514 were second and third generation. For EVE Vanguard, it is debatable what generation these war clones belong in. We can only speculate they are a mix of second and third generation, along with a possible fifth generation, or repurposed Jovian clones, since the ones featured in the EVE Online Havoc trailer were stored in the Fulcrum Station of Zarzak, a star system that exists within the recently dead Jovian Directorate, a fifth empire that was deeply involved with the other four and hosted the Yule Conference that established the New Eden calendar we know today. Fourth-gen clones were possibly featured in the Project Nova trailer, where war clones were exploited by an agent for one of the empires fighting off the invading pirate faction known as Sancha's Nation. Project Nova was set sometime between the Great Purge of the Dust 514 mercenaries and the emergence of the Vanguard by the Deathless. As you can see, it can get complicated trying to figure out which generation belonged to which timeline. But there is a general consensus that third-gen war clones introduced gender options for the Dust 514 mercenaries. The second-gen war clones were all exclusively male until the third generation were introduced. They enabled any individual consciousness or personality to select which body type it felt comfortable wearing. While the female clone does not offer much of a tactical difference when it comes to combat, they did help address a concern where a consciousness was in conflict with a body type they were given. The process of digitizing and altering a consciousness still leaves certain aspects of the personality intact. That includes gender identity. And so the female war clone was made to alleviate any distress when wearing a body type that does not match. Logically, a war clone should not be distracted by how it feels about its body while in the middle of getting shot at by futuristic weaponry. As a side note, Dust 514 players reported the female models in the game had a slightly more slender hitbox than the male models. So it is likely that there were more females running around than males because bullets were statistically less likely to hit them. Now for the Valkyrie. I never touched on them during my previous video. They were only featured in a game that bared the name for a limited time. As for the player base, it was a much smaller player base than Dust 514. The game was called Eve Valkyrie. It was a PC VR title that started with the HTC Vive and I think the Oculus, if I remember correctly. While the official website covering the Valkyrie is long dead, players of Eve Valkyrie managed to archive gameplay footage featuring echoes in the game. Echoes are audio logs hidden inside single-player free-roam maps that give insight into the four main characters prominently featured in the game: Rabbit, Fatal, Round Kavik, and the Quartermaster. But while the characters are talking in the audio logs, certain details have emerged that give us clues to the tech and how the Valkyrie were formed. Valkyrie have the benefit of having their consciousness transmitted via a burn scan, like that of the Capsuleers, but without the need of a capsule. They operate aerospace fighters like normal pilots do, but the aerospace platforms have been retrofitted with burn scanners installed right behind the head of the pilot, sitting inside the cockpit. Just like the pod, if the canopy or other pressurized sections of the fighter's hull is breached, the burn scan is initiated and the pilot's consciousness is zapped into another clone body. But there is a catch. The audio logs reveal the Valkyrie were either failed transfers that were later salvaged, or their consciousness were stolen at the moment of death. Their minds were then completely digitized like a war clone infomorph, and put into physical clone bodies to pilot the fighters, but the process was questionable at best. And so it is likely that the Valkyrie all had corrupted personalities, or were bound to have corrupted personalities due to the manner in which their consciousness was transferred and stored. Remember, the Valkyrie do not have the benefits of the fifth lobe like the war clones do. They are a glimpse into what happens when Capsuleers die frequently without regard to the integrity of the consciousness. Even Round Kavik, the main character of the game, voiced by Katie Sackhoff, appears to suffer from the effects of dying too often when you listen to her audio logs. Beyond this point, no one knows what has become of the Valkyrie. In a way, the life of a Valkyrie seems to include two deaths: the death of the body and the death of the mind. That brings us to three different infomorphs that exist within New Eden. You heard me mention that name several times already, so let's get you up to speed on what that means. Infomorph refers to anyone who is able to transmit their consciousness from one clone body to another, or from a databank into a clone body and back. The consciousness is stored either digitally or within a physical analog. That's practically it. So all players in EVE Online, EVE Vanguard, as well as the now discontinued games Dust 514 and EVE Valkyrie, are all infomorphs of a different kind built for specific uses. So there you have it. For any of you who are into the lore, I do recommend reading up the references on their official websites as well as the archives, of course. I hope you all enjoyed this summary I put together, and as usual, fly safe. Alright. Well, I hope that clears it up. Now, keep in mind though, I'm off script now. Keep in mind that some of this is, again, based off of like how the players in EVE Online and Vanguard now understand, or at least to the best of our abilities, understand the lore. And so don't take everything that I just said as absolute canon. I mean, After all, the final arbiters happen to be CCP Games. It's their IP after all. And so, other than that, let's see. Let me see. Oh, I did put in an order for the ETVR hand controllers. You've probably noticed by now that my right hand has been drifting like it's Tokyo Drift. You know, last time I've had controllers drift that hard were the Nintendo Joy-Cons. Anyways, as for my left hand, it's like it still can't hold its charge. So I think I'm on a backlog, unfortunately, and so if the backlog takes longer than a couple of weeks, I may have to consider canceling the order and going back to ordering some index controllers, which I'm kind of reluctant about. While they are good controllers, I've read some negative reviews about them. Generally, as long as you take good care of them, they should work for a very long time. I've had these for like I think almost 2 years now. I got my money's worth out of them, but they're wearing down, and I have like a nagging fear that my next order of index controllers might end up being defective, and that's time wasted. So I was thinking, let me just go ahead and order the ETVR controllers. It's spelled ETEEVR. Those are the controllers. If you're looking up, you can look them up. Although the official website is eteexr.com. That's where I ordered them. They're more expensive though. They literally have no buttons. It's all like finger sensors and touch pads. And they're a little bit more modular and adaptable from the looks of it. But again, they're pricey. Like for a pair of them, I think it was like just under $500. Surprisingly though, I was not charged shipping or handling nor tax. So I'm hoping for the best though. I already joined their Discord just to keep track. And yeah, that's it. Hopefully then this video has helped clear up a lot of doubts. And so you guys take care. Oh, I've read some feedback from you guys about my presentation. I know it's a little hard to take seriously the content I make when you see me like this, but hey, it's how I do it. And so, take care.